Our next speaker, Mr. Peter Khalil MP, has been a member of Parliament since 2016. He has been an advocate for immigrant rights and an avid defender of global democracy. He's an open defender of human rights of Hong Kongers and a strong critic of the CCP's policies. Mr. Khalil, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me and for hosting me, and the New South Wales Hong Kongers for putting this together. Even though I'm from Victoria, this is a national issue. It's an international issue. So thanks for inviting someone from Melbourne to speak to the New South Wales Hong Kongers group. You're right. Since I got elected in 2016, I have used the opportunity as a representative in our democracy to speak out for fundamental human rights and democratic freedoms for peoples around the world. And obviously this has been especially so for Hong Kongers in their struggle for their democratic freedoms and their human rights. And I think it's important as a part of a democracy and as a member of parliament that we use our voice and our advocacy in this way, because if we don't do that as democratically elected leaders, then who will? And so it's an important responsibility that we all take seriously. And I know there's been ongoing protests, mass protests around the world, and Hong Kong's been very much part of this over the last couple of years. I should say, as you said, I spoke up quite early on about the in advocacy and defence of the rights of Hong Kongers to peacefully protest for their fundamental rights and their democratic freedoms and their human rights, and for them to use their voice in that way. And I've also met many people from the Hong Kong community in Australia, in Melbourne, the General Secretary of the Victorian Hong Kong Students Association, other Hong Kong students who have been living in Melbourne, and spoke to them about the demonstrations as well in Hong Kong and the impact on their families. And these are people from Hong Kong who've also been involved in peaceful protests here in Australia, on campuses, into university campuses in Australia, supporting the basic human rights and democratic freedoms for their brothers, sisters, and their family in Hong Kong. And some of the feedback that I got from those people, the Hong Kongers here in Australia, was very, very disturbing. They have told me of threats that they have received over the phone, threats on social media, even physical threats during some of those protests. I raised these issues in Parliament and also to the relevant authorities on their behalf. And I did say to those Hong Kong students that as elected political leaders in this democracy, even though they might not vote as international students, we still have a responsibility to stand up and speak up for the right of peaceful protest and democratic freedom. As I said, if we don't do it, who will? So that's been a really, really important element in what I've been advocating on behalf of the people in Hong Kong and the people here from Hong Kong. We need to call it out. We need to call out that kind of threatening behaviour, and we need to stand firm for the right to protest and the fundamental rights that should never be violated. And I guess that's why we've gathered virtually here today, and why I'll also continue to speak up for the people of Hong Kong and represent the people that live here, and to represent the important point about democracy and freedom in our parliament. We are a parliament, and I'm happy to take some questions here, but just a couple of things to conclude with. We're a democracy in Australia, a country that values human rights, and I'm in the Labor Party, which is a party that fights for these rights. And we have a responsibility as good international citizens to speak out against violent actions, to hold governments to account, and play a really positive role on the global stage. And that is including supporting the right for peaceful protest, the right to freedom of association. And I know there's no easy solutions, but we can't change things unless if we do things alone. And so you're here playing your part today, and I'll continue to play my part as well. I will make one final comment about what we're seeing, and I'd be interested to hear from you and people, Hong Kongers, around your views. One of the things I've said publicly in the media, in the press, is that if the basic law is continually further diminished in its current form, in the sense that the autonomy that Hong Kongers have had for a period of time under the one country, two systems approach really becomes unable to salvage. I'm interested in that question, where the protesters still feel they have chance to actually save that autonomy under the basic law, whether it's even possible to go to continue that kind of governance structure, or are we past the point of no return? That's difficult to tell from here in Australia, and I would be interested to hear from people in Hong Kong and people from Hong Kong in Australia what they feel about this, because it seems to me that after the mass protests last year, there was a lot of worldwide condemnation about the moves that are made, and then even under the cover of COVID-19, the most recent move with the national security laws further diminish that vision of a genuine autonomy. And if that is the case, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on that and what you think Australia should be doing in response to that. And I'm happy to take any questions that people might have as well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Khalil. We've got some questions for you right now. This is from Grum. We want to know what has been done about some of these political asylum seekers from Hong Kong in Australia.
Yeah, good question. This is a discussion, even though we're in the Labor Party and we're in opposition, we've been actually discussing what might be the shape of migration from Hong Kong, political asylum seekers. First thing I'd say is that under the refugee law, the convention, that anyone in Hong Kong who can establish that they are persecuted for their political beliefs or their because of their ethnicity or religion or whatever it might be, has a valid claim to seek asylum, and like any other person, they should make those claims, and they'll be assessed by our judicial process. We take some 20,000 refugees a year. Our party has said that we would double that. There's also been some talk about other types of visas for people from Hong Kong. I know that you would all be aware, obviously, with the British government, the UK government's announcements around because of the relationship, the special relationship with Hong Kong, that there are a number of Hong Kongers who have dual passports and dual citizenship, and they're going to use that opportunity. Australia doesn't have the same type of pre-existing relationship, but nonetheless, there may be scope for some migration visas that are suitable with respect to skilled visas and also business visas, business class type visas, and so on, and whether there's an expansion of those, particularly for people in Hong Kong who are looking to migrate. I think that's something that we've been discussing in our party and our policy if we were to win government, but also discussing with the government, and I know those conversations are ongoing. So yeah, there'll be more on that, I think, depending on the circumstances and what happens going forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Another question from Ida. As we know, Victoria has signed up for this Belt and Road initiative. What are your thoughts on that, and what actions are you going to call in response to the Premier?
Ada, that's a good question. Our federal Labor Party has made our position very, very clear. We do not agree with a provincial or state government signing this type of international agreement. And our federal party leader, Anthony Albanese, has categorically said that we would not engage in such a agreement, the BRI agreement. And so we've made our position very, very clear. We can't force the state government to do anything in particular. We can, however, state very clearly what we would not do and what we would not accept. My own personal view is that, as a matter of principle, regardless of whether it's about China or anywhere else, the fact that a state government is actually signing an international agreement with a state body, another nation state, cuts across somewhat the Commonwealth government's federal responsibilities under our convention and also our constitution as well. It's a complicated area, and I think it would have been much more prudent for any of these types of agreements to be occur between a federal government, a national government, national parliament, and another national government. So we at the federal level don't accept that. So you asked what would be done about that. As I said, we've raised these matters as much as we can publicly, and we've stated categorically that we don't agree with it. There will be, I think, some tests being put on that particular agreement and what it actually means with respect to other states in the Federation as well. So we wait and see what happens with that.
Thank you. That's completely understandable. More on the British visas that was introduced. Queenie has a question about your position on the Australian government letting Hong Kong BNO holders stay in Hong Kong, in Australia.
Yeah. Look, Queenie, there is some precedent for this. If you remember, you might not remember, but in 1989, Bob Hawke, who was a great Labor Prime Minister and was also the Member of Parliament in my electorate, so I'm his successor in a sense in the same electorate, the same district that we represented. When Tiananmen Square occurred, Bob was very publicly moved, but he also practically and pragmatically and I think courageously also made a decision to allow many Chinese students that were in Australia at the time to remain. And there was a special provision made for them. Now, we're not in government at the moment. We would, as I said earlier, I think it's important that the current government actually has a serious look at what kind of visa arrangements can be made for Hong Kongers that may want to stay in Australia, but also for those who would like to migrate to Australia and potentially around any asylum claims as well. We will encourage the government. We will push the government on that front. And I know our Shadow Immigration Minister, Christina Keneally, has also been talking about this. So, yes, there is some scope for this. Again, as I said, there's precedent for it.
That's all the time we have. Thank you, Mr. Khalil, and your work in our fight. We hope to see you in your work, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And just in conclusion, I do appreciate you inviting me to speak to you all and some of your members up in New South Wales. And I will say this last point. The bravery and the courage of people of Hong Kong is really outstanding, and it inspires so many of us because the people in Hong Kong are standing up in the millions on the street for their freedoms. And that is something that has inspired people around the world. And we want to I want to acknowledge that and tell you we will keep doing what we can do with respect to the freedom of the people of Hong Kong. And thank you for having me with you today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Bye.